any chance that I could ask you a couple questions too? I don't know just about how much time you have, but I have a couple questions here. If you are running out of time, just let me know at any point.
Nope, you're good.
Awesome. So just to start off, for those who may not know you, obviously, like you said, you have a huge following, but there are still some people who don't know who you are, or aren't on the same gun reform advocacy side as you are. So I just wanted to know if you could give some background information about yourself and basically how you got involved in gun safety and gun reform advocacy.
No, listen, that's easy. And it's in 1 week. It will be 5 years since the Parkland school shooting. Mm-hmm. And on February 14th, 2018, I sent my 2 children, Jesse and Jaime, to high school. Jaime, at the time, was a freshman. She was 14. And my son at the time was a junior. He was 16. My son survived that day. My daughter did not. And because of that shooting, my life has been transformed, and I spend my life now fighting to reduce gun violence in America.
That's amazing. Yeah, obviously everything surrounding the entire events are super ridiculously tragic, but I was watching some interviews, and one of the interviewees said to you as well, I am so thoroughly impressed that most parents, I think, would kind of just sit back and hope that legislators and government officials would kind of take action for them. But it really does say something about your character that you were the type of person to go out there and say, you know what, I have to take it into my own hands. This is my fight to win, which I'm super impressive.
And I don't intend to lose.
So, exactly.
So there's work to do.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if this is too much to ask you, but obviously you're just talking about your daughter Jaime as well as your son who's in school on that day. But from a parent's perspective, since this article is basically all around school, can you tell me what was going through your mind that day as a student or a parent of students at that school?
Well, before I knew the outcome of my daughter, you mean? Or my son?
Yeah, I would say before, and then, just...
Well, before I knew the outcome of what happened to my children, it was a combination of fear and panic, anxiety. You want to just get your kids as fast as you can and grab them and hug them. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of stuff going on. And as time went on and we hadn't heard from my daughter, it became an intense level of fear over the worst possible outcome. And, listen, my daughter was the first publicly identified because a friend of mine was one of the police officers. And so we knew early, probably 5:30, it goes to a level of devastation and emotional carnage that you can't put into words. Your entire life spins out of control. You all of a sudden come to this reality that your entire existence is about to change. You have a funeral to plan while trying to hold those you love upright. And it's a day that there are things I remember about that day in distinct detail. I can tell you everything about them, but there are a whole lot of things about that day that are a blur. That people to this day tell me about, and I just have no memory of it.
Yeah, I'm sure it's absolutely just insane, and I say that to people all the time. My boss was, and this is not to equate my situation with yours in the slightest bit, but my boss, it was the 10-year anniversary of Sandy Hook, just about, I think it was December 14th of 2022, just literally almost less than a month ago. And, he was just taken aback just from my simple story of just being, in close proximity. So I could never imagine what it's like to actually have this come into your community, into your school system. So following up with that, I know that during your daughter and the other victims, during their vigil, you said to the killer that he impacted the wrong family, the wrong dad, and the wrong community. But following the shooting, did you ever feel like the school systems, your community, or your local law enforcement let you down to a certain degree because of this event?
In the immediate hours, no.
Yeah.
It was within a matter of days, though, that we started to learn just how much they did, in fact, fail. In fact, maybe even the next day. I think by the time I went to that vigil and 24 hours after the shooting, I probably knew, again, there's things that are a blur.
Yep.
I think I probably already knew quite a bit about failures, and not just on the day of the shooting, but leading up to the shooting.
Yeah.
It was the day after the vigil when I was sitting in a funeral home planning Jaime's funeral that I got the call from the FBI talking to us about their failure to pursue a lead that actually would have caused them, had they followed up, to apprehend this person, because they actually were tipped off and they didn't follow up. It all started to come out just in the immediate days following the shooting.
Yeah. And that's, for me, like, that's the biggest issue right now, is that with these couple events, they did have SWAT teams that were in the area, but now and I was going to actually ask you this question a little bit later, but I think it's fine to ask right now. With these SWAT events, actually, the state of Connecticut put out a warning to basically all the students, all parents, faculty, staff, administrators for, I think, every school and every school district, I should say, and basically said, hey, we want to inform you guys that we have been swatted so many times to so many different schools without basically anything happening, because we are trying to make that, jump to prevent anything from happening. But now it's kind of created this this notion that children are becoming desensitized to gun violence in schools and shootings and kind of any of these atrocities that have to do with gun violence. What are your thoughts on that? That kids are no longer even shocked by the presence of guns in their schools?
I think it's one of the most jarring, horrific realities of how our legislators for far too many years let us down and let a lobby that profits off of death have say in public safety. And the reality is, for far too many years, that was the case. And because of it, we now live in an environment where we're not shocked when we hear about gun violence. And it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah. And so, obviously, I wouldn't want to place all the blame on the school administrators, the local law enforcement, and elected officials whatsoever. Like, that was not my main intention. But as we said, it's becoming almost obscene that they are remaining silent. And so.
Well, and partly because they don't know what to do.
Exactly, yeah, that's where I was.
And it's right, it's right of you not to place all the blame on that.
Yeah.
Because we, through legislation, have made it far too easy for those who do actually intend harm to have the means to do so. And, listen, when Jaime was killed 5 years ago, there were 300 million weapons in America. Here we are 5 years later, there's over 400 million.
Yeah,
there's more guns by far than there are people. Okay, and those guns are concentrated in about a third of the population. And while you live in Connecticut, a state with really tight gun laws, you are bordered by states that don't necessarily have tight gun laws.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, people who intend harm, because of the easy access that we have created to weaponry, have the ability to carry it out. And you now do have schools who are afraid to talk about what happens in these schools.
Yeah. And that leads to basically my next question. What would you recommend that these schools do? Because I think the easiest thing for them to do is essentially stay silent to try to, avoid any negative publicity or criticisms from parents and, law enforcement, everyone, just the entire community. So what do you recommend that they do as opposed to just remaining silent to kind of avoid this negative attention?
I think schools and school administrators and law enforcement together all ought to become the biggest proponents
Yep.
of legislation to reduce gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I think any time somebody who's a student or a faculty member does anything to potentially engage in that kind of violence on a school campus, rather than being silent, that person ought to be removed from the premises, never allowed back on, not entitled to an education, or at least there.
Yep.
And it ought to be very public.
Yeah. And see, the biggest thing that I've been looking into is just the lack of publicity. So I went on social media today and I asked people as well. It's been 10 years since Sandy Hook occurred, like I said earlier, and I just my mom and I were talking about it too. It doesn't seem like assault rifles are really going anywhere in this nation at this point in time. And that's just really, really detrimental to, I think, everyone's safety, because it's creating this norm that, guns are here to stay. What are some of the ways that you have been able to amend and, help legislators or help people like Joe Biden come up with different gun reform laws?
Listen, and I'm thankful to be able to call your senators friends of mine, because they have been leaders on this.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the work we passed and the recent legislation passed back in April, the Safer Communities Act. Okay?
Yep.
Things like a red flag law. Things like making it harder for people under 21 to get a gun. I wish we would have raised the age, but just that they weren't able to get that passed. But it's harder now. Okay? Making it, dealing with domestic abuse. Okay? There's things in that law that deal with the illegal trafficking of weapons. Okay? So these are all things that we can do to lower the risk of gun violence. And anytime there's a chance we can do something like that, we must. In Florida, immediately after Parkland, we raised the age to 21, we passed red flag laws. Those two things are saving lives.
Without a doubt. And I was going to say, obviously there are multiple different ways to combat gun violence, whether through its, more diligent background checks, just like you were saying, increasing the age of accessibility, other barriers to accessibility as well, outright bans on automatic weapons in general. What do you think, if one of them or working in combination, what do you think is going to be the most effective means of just getting guns out of people's hands? Not even,
Well, listen, I don't look at it as in getting guns out of people's hands.
Yeah.
I look at it as, what can we do? I have three metrics.
Yep.
To lower the gun violence death rate,
mm-hmm.
to lower the instances of gun violence, and to lower the severity of gun violence injuries when they happen. And much of that does involve removing weapons from those who are deemed a risk to themselves or someone else.
Yep.
I think red flags are incredibly important. Mm-hmm. I think raising the age to 21 is a big deal because, let's face it, young men before they're 21 deal with things sometimes in a very emotional way that leads to gun violence. I think, dealing with, I think a background check is a must, but I would extend it to ammunition. And in fact, right now in Congress, there's a law waiting for hearings called Jaime's Law, named after my daughter, which seeks to extend background checks to ammunition. And here's why I believe that's probably the most important piece of legislation.
Yeah.
With 400 million weapons on the streets of America already, many of which are in the hands of, people who are prohibited from even having them.
Mm-hmm.
They buy them on the street or they steal them. If you're a prohibited purchaser of a gun, by law, you are also prohibited from owning or buying ammunition.
Yep.
But there is no requirement for a background check on ammunition. So anyone who's in possession of a weapon, if they're not supposed to be, they simply walk into the store and buy the bullets. Mm-hmm. If we extend background checks to ammunition, we will shut down violence immediately.
Yeah. There's almost no question. I heard you talking about something down a similar line during a recent interview that you had. And it just seemed like, in my eyes, I had never really thought particularly about getting just the ammunition, putting harsher background checks on purchasing ammunition because, I think in a lot of people's minds, they think of guns and they think that is the primary weapon. But the only way that, those guns are able to inflict damage is if people do actually buy or are able to buy the ammunition. I couldn't believe that I didn't think about it in the first place because it seems like such a straightforward means of kind of, preventing these things from happening in the future. Why do you think it's taking so long, and why do you think it has taken so long before trying to pass Jaime's law to kind of bring this to legislators' attentions? And
because of a lobby that has spent a lot of years being dishonest, and putting a lot of money into a lot of legislators, that has brought us to the place where we are today. And we need to defeat that lobby. So it's listen, I just wrote a new book that's coming out in May called American Carnage. And the whole point of that book is to take on these lies and these myths and this lobby. And that's what we're going to do.
Finally, you said in a recent interview that you felt an overwhelming amount of guilt for not becoming a gun reform activist until your family was personally impacted. In these recent instances in the Windham area where students brought guns to Windham High School, like I said, luckily no students, faculty, or staff were injured or killed. But what would you say to a community that is essentially waiting to take action only until after tragedy has struck them personally?
Don't be like me. I carry the guilt that I wasn't speaking out about these things until after it was my daughter. And the facts are, we live in a society now where gun violence in schools, gun violence in our communities, it happens. It's not something we can sweep under the rug anymore. And if there's any chance that you can speak up now and stop the next one, do it while you can.